Daniel Mercer had buried enough dead to know the difference between grief and madness, but when he found Clara Whitmore wandering barefoot through the churchyard at midnight, speaking to headstones in a voice not quite her own, he understood there were things between those two states that no one had names for. The town said she was cursed, that spirits followed her like dogs, that marrying her would bring death into his house. But Daniel had already lived with death long enough to know it didn't need an invitation. So when the Reverend refused to perform the ceremony and her own family turned their backs, Daniel Mercer stood in that empty church and made his vows to a woman who couldn't promise she'd always know where she was when she woke. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The train station in Millbrook Creek sat at the edge of town like an afterthought, a weathered structure of grey timber and rusted iron that seemed to sag under the weight of too many departures. Daniel Mercer stood on the platform with his hat pulled low, coat buttoned against the October wind that carried the smell of wood smoke and distant rain. He'd come to collect a shipment of fence wire and seed bags, the kind of errand that required little thought and less conversation, which suited him fine. He was a man of 34 who looked older, not from hardship but from the kind of stillness that settles into a person when they've learned to carry weight without complaint. His hands were broad and calloused from working his family's farm alone since his father's stroke 3 years prior. His face was clean-shaven, angular, with eyes the color of turned earth. People in town knew him as reliable, quiet, the kind of man who paid his debts and kept his word, but didn't linger after church services or join the conversations at the general store. The afternoon train arrived with its usual shriek of brakes and hiss of steam. Daniel waited as the conductor helped passengers down, watched as merchants unloaded crates and barrels. He was reaching for his wire shipment when he heard it, a woman's voice, low and rhythmic, speaking words that didn't quite form sentences. He turned. She sat on the far end of the platform, tucked between a stack of mail bags and the station wall, hidden from most angles, unless you were standing exactly where Daniel stood. Her dress was dark blue, travel-stained, with mud crusted along the hem. Her hair, the color of honey left too long in sunlight, had come loose from its pins and hung in tangles around her shoulders. Her feet were bare, pale against the wooden planks, and her toes were bleeding, but it was her eyes that stopped him. They were open, staring at something only she could see, and her lips moved in constant whisper. Her hands gestured at empty air, fingers tracing patterns as if following. Invisible threads. Daniel set down his crate and approached slowly. As he drew closer, he could hear fragments of what she was saying. "Told me the water was rising. Couldn't reach the door," Mother said. "Don't look back, but I did. I did look back, and she was." "Miss?" Daniel said quietly. She didn't respond. Didn't even blink. Her gaze remained fixed on a point somewhere past his shoulder, and her hands continued their strange weaving motion. From behind him, the station master's voice rang out, "Don't bother with that one, Mercer. Been sitting there since the morning train. Won't answer when spoken to, won't take water. Just mumbles to herself like she's touched." Daniel crouched down, bringing himself level with her. "Miss, are you hurt?" Her whisper continued, unbroken. The baby was crying, but the crying stopped when the water came through the window. The station master appeared at Daniel's shoulder, arms crossed. "That's Clara Whitmore. Used to live over in Ashford County till her family sent her away. They say she talks to the dead, walks in her sleep, and wakes up places she shouldn't be. Her aunt was supposed to meet her here 2 days ago, but the old woman never came. Been trying to get the sheriff to move her along, but he says she ain't breaking any laws by sitting." Daniel looked at Clara's feet, at the blood dried black between her toes. "She's been here 2 days? Near enough. Some folks tried to help her up this morning, but she fought like a wild cat, drew blood on Martin's wife. After that, people decided to let her be till she came to her senses. Daniel studied her face. She couldn't have been more than 25, with features that would have been called delicate if they weren't so hollow. Her cheeks were sunken, her lips cracked and pale. But there was something else too, something in the way she held herself, even while lost in whatever vision consumed her, a dignity, fragile but present, like a candle still burning in a storm. "Couldn't save them all," she whispered. "Told me their names so I wouldn't forget. But I forgot. Anyway, I forgot." Daniel straightened and turned to the station master. "I'll take her." The man blinked. "What?" I said, "I'll take her. She needs care. Can't leave her here." The station master's face shifted from surprise to concern. "Now hold on, Mercer. You don't know what you're dealing with. The Whitmore family had the Reverend come out twice to pray over her. Didn't take. Some say she's got demons. Others say she's got the sight, and it drove her mad. Either way, she ain't someone you want under your roof. She's someone who needs help. She's someone who'll bring trouble. You mark my words. That girl's got something wrong with her that ain't just in her head. You take her home, and you'll regret it." Daniel looked down at Clara again. Her whispers had softened, but her hands still moved in their strange patterns. He thought of his farmhouse, empty except for himself and his father who could barely speak or move from his chair. He thought of the long silences that filled those rooms, the weight of days that passed without purpose, beyond survival. "I've got room," Daniel said simply. The station master shook his head. "Your funeral." Daniel knelt again and carefully, slowly, reached out to touch Clara's shoulder. The moment his fingers made contact, she went rigid. Her whisper stopped. Her eyes, which had been unfocused and distant, suddenly snapped to his face with an intensity that nearly made him pull back. "They're here," she said, her voice clear and present for the first time. "All around us. Can't you see them?" "No, miss, I can't. They're waiting. They're always waiting." Her hand shot out and gripped his wrist with surprising strength. Daniel said, keeping his voice steady. "Then I'm going to take you somewhere safe, somewhere warm. Do you understand?" Her grip tightened. "Safe? There's no safe. Not from them. Not from what I see. Maybe not, but there's warm and dry. That's something." For a long moment she stared at him. Then, slowly, her fingers loosened. She didn't release him entirely, but the violence went out of her grip. "You don't believe me. I believe you're cold and hurt and need care. The rest we can sort later." Something flickered across her face, emotion too quick to name. Then she nodded. Just once. Daniel helped her stand, supporting her weight as she swayed. Her legs nearly buckled, but he caught her, and after a moment she found her balance. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice small now, childlike. "Daniel Mercer. Daniel." She repeated it like she was testing the weight of it. "That's a good name. Strong. The kind of name that holds." He didn't know what to say to that, so he simply guided her toward his wagon. Behind them, the station master called out, "Don't say I didn't warn you, Mercer." Daniel didn't respond. He helped Clara onto the wagon seat, then retrieved a blanket from the back and wrapped it around her shoulders. She pulled it tight, still trembling. He collected his wire and seed bags, loaded them quickly, then climbed up beside her. As they pulled away from the station, Clara turned to look back. "She's still there," she whispered. "Who is? The woman who died on the platform 18 years ago. Fell and struck her head. She's been waiting there ever since, asking everyone who passes if they've seen her husband." Clara's eyes were distant again. "I told her he's in the cemetery on the hill, but she won't leave. She doesn't believe me." Daniel flicked the reins, urging the horses forward. The town passed slowly around them, the general store, the post office, the white-steepled church that stood at the crossroads. People stopped to stare as they went by. Daniel could feel their eyes, could imagine the talk that would start before they even reached the edge of town. "Mrs. Brennan. stood outside the bakery, hands on her hips. Beside her, two other women leaned close, whispering behind their hands. Near the blacksmith's forge, old Samuel Dutton actually stepped into the street, squinting at Clara like she was something he needed to identify. "They think I'm mad," Clara said quietly, not looking at any of them. "Probably. Does that bother you?" Daniel considered. "People think a lot of things. Doesn't make them true." They reached the edge of town, where the road narrowed to packed dirt and gravel. The forest pressed close on either side, oak and pine standing in dark columns. The afternoon light slanted gold through the branches, and the air smelled of moss and decay. Clara pulled the blanket tighter. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Taking me. You don't know me. Don't know what I am. You're someone who needed help. I'm someone people are afraid of." "That too, I suppose." She turned to look at him fully for the first time. Her eyes, he noticed, were grey-green, like river stones. "You're not afraid. Should I be? Most people are. They say I bring death with me, that the spirits cling to me like burrs, that anywhere I go, misfortune follows." Daniel guided the horses around a fallen branch. "Is that true?" Clara was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know anymore. I see them. I've seen them since I was a child. The dead who haven't moved on. They talk to me, ask me things, show me things. At first I thought everyone could see them, but they can't. Only me. And when I started talking about it, when I started telling people what the dead were saying..." She trailed off. "They thought you were mad," Daniel finished. "Or cursed. My father brought ministers. My mother tried herbs and tonics. Nothing worked. The dead kept coming. And then I started sleepwalking. I'd wake up in places I shouldn't be. The cemetery, other people's houses, once in the middle of the river with no memory of how I got there. My family said I was possessed. They sent me to my aunt in Hartford, but she..." Clara's voice broke. "She died 3 weeks after I arrived. Heart attack in the night. Her children blamed me. Said I brought death into their house. You think you did? I don't know what I think anymore. All I know is that people die, and I see what's left, and no one else does. So they're afraid." The farmhouse came into view as they crested a low hill. It was a simple structure, 2 stories of weathered clapboard with a stone chimney and a sagging front porch. The barn stood behind it, red paint, faded to rust. Fields stretched in 3 directions, most of them lying fallow now that harvest was done. Daniel brought the wagon to a stop near the porch steps. Clara stared at the house with an expression he couldn't read. "Is anyone else here?" she asked. "My father. He had a stroke. Can't walk or speak much anymore. But he's no threat to you." "That's not what I meant." She pointed at the upstairs window on the right. "There's a woman up there. In the corner of the room. She's wearing a nightgown, and she's crying." Daniel followed her gaze. The window was dark, empty. "There's no one up there. That was my mother's room. She died 6 years ago." Clara nodded slowly. "I know." "She's the one crying." A chill ran through Daniel that had nothing to do with the October wind. He climbed down from the wagon and moved around to help Clara, but she was already stepping down, her bare feet touching the cold ground without flinching. She walked toward the house slowly, and Daniel noticed she was limping, favoring her left foot where the blood had dried darkest. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Wait," he said, and before she could protest, he scooped her into his arms. She stiffened, but didn't fight him. He carried her up the porch steps and through the front door into the warmth of the house. The interior was sparse, but clean. A sitting room with a stone hearth, a kitchen beyond, stairs leading up. In a chair near the fire sat Daniel's father, Moses Mercer, a man who had once been large and commanding, but now seemed folded into himself, grey-haired and hollow-eyed. He looked up as they entered, and his mouth worked soundlessly. "This is Clara," Daniel said to his father. "She'll be staying with us for a time." Moses's eyes moved from Daniel to Clara and back again. One hand lifted slightly, a gesture that might have meant anything. Daniel carried Clara to the kitchen and set her in a chair near the stove. He filled a basin with water from the pump, set it to warm, then knelt and carefully lifted her foot. The cuts were numerous but shallow, the kind you'd get from walking over rough ground or broken glass. "This will sting," he said, and began cleaning the wounds. Clara watched him work, her expression unreadable. "You're gentle," she said after a moment. "No point in causing more pain than necessary. Most people wouldn't care." "I'm not most people." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "No, I don't suppose you are." When her feet were cleaned and bandaged, Daniel prepared a simple meal: bread, cheese, cold chicken from the previous night's dinner. Clara ate slowly, like someone remembering how. When she finished, her eyes were heavy. "You should rest," Daniel said. "I'll make up the spare room." "The one where your mother is?" He paused. "That's the only spare room." "Yes." Clara nodded. "She's not angry, she's just sad. She misses you. Wants you to know she's proud of what you've done with the farm." Daniel's throat tightened. He didn't know what to say to that, so he simply led Clara upstairs. The room was as he'd left it, his mother's bed, her dresser, her rocking chair by the window. Everything is covered in a thin layer of dust. Clara stood in the doorway, head tilted as if listening. Then she walked to the corner and knelt down. "It's all right," she whispered to the empty air. "You can rest now." She stayed like that for a long moment, then rose and turned to Daniel. "She's gone. To wherever they go when they're ready." Daniel stood frozen, heart hammering in his chest. He wanted to dismiss it as madness, as tricks of a damaged mind. But something in Clara's face, in the way the room suddenly felt lighter, emptier, made him wonder. "Thank you," he said quietly. Clara looked at him with those riverstone eyes. "For what?" "For telling me. Even if you're mad, even if none of it's real. Thank you." She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her hollow face into something almost beautiful. "You're welcome, Daniel Mercer." He left her to sleep and returned downstairs. His father was still by the fire, and Daniel sat across from him, head in his hands. Outside, darkness had fallen complete, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called into the night. Whatever he'd brought into his house, whatever Clara Whitmore was or carried with her, there was no taking it back now. The town would talk, people would judge. But as Daniel sat there in the firelight, thinking of his mother's room feeling lighter, of Clara's grateful smile, he found he didn't regret his choice. Not yet, anyway. The first morning, Daniel woke to find Clara standing in his kitchen before dawn, fully dressed, stirring a pot of oatmeal on the stove. She moved with the mechanical precision of someone not entirely present, her eyes half-lidded, her movements fluid but disconnected. He watched from the doorway as she set the table for three, placed spoons with exact spacing, and returned to the stove to stir again. "Clara?" he said softly. She didn't respond. Just continued her work, ladling oatmeal into bowls, adding honey from the jar she'd somehow found in the pantry. When she finished, she walked past him without acknowledgement and climbed the stairs. Moments later, he heard her bedroom door close. Daniel approached the table. 3 bowls of oatmeal, still steaming, the spoons were lined up parallel. The honey jar sat precisely centered between 2 of the settings. He touched one of the bowls and found it warm. His father wheeled himself to the kitchen entrance in the chair Daniel had modified, with old wagon wheels. Moses looked at the table, then at Daniel, his eyebrows raised in question. She's asleep, Daniel said. Was walking in her sleep, I think. Moses made a low sound in his throat and pointed at the third bowl. I suppose that one's for her when she wakes. They ate in silence. The oatmeal was perfectly cooked, neither too thick nor too thin. Daniel had never mentioned where the honey was kept, yet she'd found it. When they finished, he covered Clara's bowl with a cloth and left it on the stove to stay warm. The morning chores took him to the barn, feeding the horses, mucking stalls, checking the cattle in the far pasture. When he returned 2 hours later, Clara sat at the kitchen table eating the oatmeal he'd left for her. She was fully awake now, her eyes clear. "Did I cook this?" she asked. "You did. I don't remember." Daniel hung his coat on the peg. "Does that happen often?" "More than I'd like." She took another spoonful, chewing slowly. "Sometimes I wake up places I don't remember going. Sometimes I've done things I don't remember doing. The doctors said it's part of my condition." "What else did the doctors say?" Clara's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "That I should be institutionalized. That I'm a danger to myself." She set the spoon down. "That I'd be better off dead." Daniel poured himself coffee from the pot, noted that Clara must have made that too. "You don't seem dangerous. Give it time." Over the next 3 days, Daniel learned the rhythm of Clara's strangeness. She slept deeply from dawn until mid-morning, as if whatever energy she expended at night left her depleted. When she woke, she moved through the house quietly, never asking where things were but somehow finding them. The broom in the closet, the mending basket in the sitting room, the salve for Moses's bed sores in the medicine cabinet. She spoke little. When she did, it was usually to Moses, whose presence seemed to calm her. She'd sit beside his chair and read to him from the Bible or the almanac, her voice low and steady. Moses would close his eyes and listen, and sometimes Daniel would catch something like peace settling over his father's twisted features. In the afternoons, Clara worked. She swept floors that didn't need sweeping, scrubbed windows until they gleamed, reorganized the pantry with a system Daniel couldn't quite decipher, but that made finding things easier. She moved through these tasks with focus, as if they anchored her to something solid. But she also stopped mid-task. Frequently. She'd be folding laundry and suddenly go still, head tilted, listening to something Daniel couldn't hear. Her lips would move silently. Sometimes she'd nod, sometimes she'd shake her head. Then she'd resume folding as if nothing had happened. Daniel never asked what she heard, didn't press her to explain. He simply worked around her pauses the way he worked around his father's limitations, with patience and without judgment. On the 4th night, he woke to the sound of his front door opening. He rose quickly, pulled on trousers, and hurried downstairs. Clara stood on the porch in her nightgown, bare feet on cold wood, arms outstretched as if reaching for someone. 3 steps forward, she said clearly. Then turn left. You'll find it under the oak. Daniel approached slowly. "Clara, she's been looking for 30 years, Clara continued, still facing the darkness. "Doesn't remember where she buried it. I told her the tree fell in the storm, but she doesn't believe me. Clara, you need to come inside. Just a moment. She's crying. Can't you hear her crying?" Daniel couldn't hear anything, except wind through the pines and the distant call of a whippoorwill. He took off his coat and draped it over Clara's shoulders. "It's cold. Come inside." Clara blinked, suddenly aware of him. She looked down at her bare feet, at the coat around her shoulders, then at the darkness beyond the porch. "I did it again." "You did. I'm sorry. I know it's unsettling." Daniel guided her back inside, closed the door firmly. "Do you remember what you were saying?" "No. I never do." She pulled the coat tighter. "But I know I was talking to someone. I could feel her presence, could hear her voice in my head, though not with my ears. Does that make sense?" "Not particularly." A small smile crossed her face. "At least you're honest." The next morning, Daniel found himself drawn to the old oak at the edge of his property. It had indeed fallen years ago, roots upturned, trunk lying like a fallen giant. He walked 3 paces from where it had stood, turned left as Clara had instructed in her sleep, and there, barely visible beneath fallen leaves, was a small iron box. Inside, a wedding ring, a lock of hair tied with faded ribbon, and a photograph so old the faces had nearly disappeared into sepia. He brought the box back to the house. Clara was kneading bread dough, her hands dusted with flour. He set the box on the table without a word. She looked at it, recognition flickering across her face, even though she'd never seen it before. "You found it. Where you said it would be." Clara wiped her hands on her apron, opened the box carefully. She stared at the contents for a long moment, then closed it again. "There's a grave marker in the church cemetery. Martha Hensley, born 1849, died 1897. The ring should go there." "How do you know?" "Because she just told me." Clara met his eyes. "And because now that you've found it, she can finally leave." Daniel stood there, the box heavy in his hands, trying to reconcile what he knew of the world with what Clara claimed. Every logical part of him said this was coincidence, that she'd somehow seen the box before, that there was a rational explanation. But another part, smaller and quieter, whispered that maybe, just maybe, the world was stranger than he'd been taught to believe. That afternoon, he rode to the cemetery and placed the ring on Martha Hensley's grave. When he returned, Clara was hanging laundry on the line, and she looked lighter somehow, less burdened. She didn't mention Martha Hensley again, and Daniel didn't ask. The town's judgment arrived piecemeal. Mrs. Brennan stopped by on the 6th day, ostensibly to bring a pie, but really to peer through the windows and report back. Daniel answered the door, accepted the pie with thanks, and didn't invite her in. She stood on the porch, craning her neck. "I heard you took in that Whitmore girl," she said. "I did. That's very charitable of you." Her eyes finally found Clara through the kitchen window. "Though some might say it's unwise. A man alone with a young woman of questionable character. Clara's character isn't questionable to me." "Yes, well," Mrs. Brennan sniffed. "We'll see how long that lasts. My Harold says she's been seen talking to thin air, walking the property line, at midnight." "That's not natural, Daniel. Neither is gossip, but folks manage it just fine." Mrs. Brennan's face pinched. "I'm just trying to look out for you. Your poor mother would be worried sick if she knew. My mother's dead. Exactly my point. You need someone sensible to guide you, not some girl who communes with spirits." Daniel took a step forward, his size suddenly obvious. He wasn't an aggressive man, but he was large, and when he moved with purpose, people noticed. "I appreciate the pie, Mrs. Brennan, but Clara stays. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." The woman retreated, huffing indignation, but Daniel knew the message would spread, knew that within hours, every household in Millbrook Creek would know he'd defended Clara, which would only make the rumors worse. Inside, Clara stood by the window, watching Mrs. Brennan's retreat. "You shouldn't have done that." "Done what?" "Defended me. It'll only make things harder for you." Daniel cut into the pie, found it dry and oversweetened. "People will talk regardless. Might as well give them something honest to talk about." Clara turned from the window. For the first time since arriving, she looked directly at him with something other than wariness or confusion. "Why do you do this? Really? You don't know me. Don't owe me anything. You could have left me at that station." Daniel considered his answer carefully. "My mother used to say that kindness doesn't need a reason, that the moment you start asking why you should help someone is the moment you've already failed." That's a beautiful thought. She was a beautiful person. "I know," she told me. Daniel's hand stilled on the pie server. "When?" "This morning, while I was making bread." She stood right where you're standing and told me to tell you that the north fence needs mending before winter and that you should plant potatoes in the eastern field come spring because the soil's finally recovered. Clara's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were relaying messages from a living person. She also said you worry too much and that she's glad I'm here. Daniel set down the pie server. His hands were shaking slightly. My mother's been dead 6 years. I know. She told me that too. Said she stayed because your father needed her, but now that someone else is here to help, she can rest. Clara moved to the table, sat down across from where he stood. I know how this sounds. I know what you must think of me. I don't know what I think. Most people think I'm mad, or evil, or both. Daniel finally met her eyes. I think you're someone who sees things I can't. Whether that's madness or gift or curse, I don't know. But I know you've been nothing but helpful since you arrived. Know you work hard and ask for nothing and treat my father with more kindness than most of his own family ever did. He paused. So whatever else you are, you're also good. And that's enough for me. Something shifted in Clara's expression. The perpetual guardedness softened just slightly, like ice beginning to thaw at the edges. You're the first person who's ever said that to me. Then everyone else is a fool. She laughed, a sound Daniel realized he hadn't heard before. It was brief, but genuine, and it changed her face entirely. For a moment, she looked young, unburdened, the way people are supposed to look before the world teaches them otherwise. That night, Daniel woke again to find Clara standing in the yard, but this time she wasn't alone. Or rather, she was alone in the way normal people measured such things, but Daniel had started to suspect there were other ways of measuring. She stood near the barn, gesturing to empty air, her nightgown ghostly in the moonlight. He watched from the window, not approaching this time. Her body language was different than before, not just speaking but arguing. Her hands cut sharp patterns, her head shook emphatically. After several minutes she went still, then she collapsed. Daniel was out the door and across the yard in seconds. He reached her just as she stirred, her eyes fluttering open, confused and exhausted. What happened? She murmured. You fainted. No. Before that. What did I do? Daniel lifted her carefully. She weighed almost nothing, as if whatever she'd done had burned away substance. You were talking to someone. Arguing, I think. Clara's eyes closed. There's a man. He died in your barn 20 years ago. Fell from the loft. He's angry. Thinks someone pushed him. Wants revenge on people who are already dead. Her voice was fading. I told him he needs to let it go. But he won't listen. Daniel carried her inside and laid her on the couch near the dying fire. He built it back up, wrapped her in blankets, and sat watch until her breathing deepened into sleep. In the morning she remembered nothing, but when Daniel went to the barn to do his chores, he felt something different in the air. A heaviness that hadn't been there before, as if something old and angry was paying attention. He said nothing to Clara about it, just went about his work and kept his eyes open. The pattern continued. Days were quiet, productive, almost normal. Clara cooked and cleaned, read to Moses, tended the small herb garden she'd started near the kitchen door. She spoke sparingly, but always with purpose. Never complained, never asked for anything beyond what she needed. But nights were different. 3 or 4 times a week, Daniel would wake to find her wandering, sometimes in the yard, sometimes in the house, once as far as the road before he caught up to her. She always spoke to people he couldn't see, delivered messages, made promises, sometimes argued or pleaded. And always, she remembered nothing when she woke. Daniel began leaving his door cracked, listening for the sound of her footsteps. He learned the specific creak of the 3rd stair, the soft click of the front door latch. He kept a blanket by his bedside to wrap around her shoulders when he found her. He never touched her more than necessary. Never asked questions that felt like invasions. Just watched, waited, and brought her safely back when she wandered too far. Moses noticed. The old man's eyes followed Clara with a mixture of wonder and concern. One afternoon, while Clara was outside tending her garden, Moses gripped Daniel's wrist and made urgent sounds in his throat. "I know, Pa," Daniel said quietly. "I know it's strange, but she's not hurting anyone." Moses shook his head, frustrated by his inability to form words. He pointed at Clara, then at Daniel, then pressed his hand over his heart. "I'm being careful," Daniel said. Moses's eyes said he didn't believe that for a second. That evening, as Daniel chopped wood for the fire, Clara appeared at his side. She didn't speak, just picked up the split pieces and stacked them in the neat rows she preferred. They worked in silence, the rhythm of axe and stack, the shared purpose of preparing for winter. When the pile was done, she finally spoke. "You haven't asked me about my family." Daniel set down the axe. "Figured you'd tell me if you wanted to. Most people ask, want to know why they gave up on me. Why didn't they fight harder to keep me? Do you want to tell me?" Clara was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun sink behind the tree line. "My father was a preacher. My mother was the daughter of a preacher. They believed the world was ordered, rational, governed by laws both divine and natural. And then they had me." She picked at a splinter on one of the logs. "I started seeing them when I was 4. The dead. I'd talk to them like they were alive. My parents thought it was imagination at first. Then they thought it was attention-seeking. Then they thought it was sin. What did they do? Everything they could think of. Prayer, fasting, exorcism. Twice. They brought in ministers from 3 counties. Had me drink blessed water until I vomited. Kept me locked in my room for days at a time, thinking isolation would drive out whatever possessed me." Her voice remained steady, but Daniel heard the cost beneath it. Nothing worked. The dead kept coming, and my parents kept trying harder to fix me, until finally they realized I couldn't be fixed. So they sent me away, to your aunt, who died within a month of my arrival, just like my mother's cousin died a week after I visited. Just like the neighbor's child died the day after I held her. Clara finally looked at him. "You see why people are afraid? Why they think death follows me? People die, Clara. It's what they do. Doesn't mean you caused it. Doesn't mean I didn't." Daniel picked up the axe, tested its edge against his thumb. "My mother died on a Tuesday. Clear spring day, nothing remarkable about it. She was hanging laundry and just stopped. Heart gave out. She was 48 years old, healthy as anyone." He set the axe down. "I've spent 6 years wondering if I could have prevented it. If I'd checked on her sooner, called the doctor faster, done something different. But the truth is, her heart was going to stop that day, no matter what I did. Same as your aunt's heart would have stopped whether you were there or not. You don't know that. Neither do you. But I know guilt, and I know how it lies. Tells you that you're responsible for things beyond your control, makes you carry weight that isn't yours to carry." He met her eyes. "So maybe you see the dead. Maybe they talk to you. Maybe that's real, or maybe it's something else. But either way, you're not responsible for their dying. You're just someone who can't look away from what comes after." Clara's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Just nodded once, sharp and definite, as if accepting something she'd been fighting for years. They carried the wood inside together, stacked it by the hearth, and as darkness fell complete, Daniel realized something had shifted between them. Not dramatically, not with declarations or promises. Just a small crack in the wall each of them had built around themselves, letting through the first thin light of understanding. Moses watched them from his chair, and when Clara went upstairs to sleep, he caught Daniel's arm again. This time, he didn't look worried. This time, he smiled a crooked, half-paralyzed smile, but genuine. Daniel smiled back and banked the fire for the night. Outside, Winter drew closer with each passing day, and somewhere in the darkness the dead continued their endless waiting. But inside the farmhouse, 3 people who had been alone were learning what it meant to be something else. Not quite family. Not yet. But no longer strangers either. The first snow came in mid-November, soft and hesitant, dusting the fields in white that melted by noon. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching it fall, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. Daniel noticed she'd been standing there for 20 minutes, unmoving, barely breathing. "Clara?" She startled, tea sloshing over the rim onto her fingers. She didn't seem to notice. "There's a child in the field, a boy, maybe 7 years old. He's looking for his dog." Daniel moved to the window. The field was empty except for snow and stubble. "When did he die?" Clara's eyes widened slightly. It was the first time Daniel had asked about the dead, as if they were real, as if their presence was simply fact. 1863. Winter. He went looking for the dog during a blizzard and got turned around. By the time they found him, it was too late. She set down the teacup. "He's been looking for that dog ever since." "What was the dog's name?" "Copper. He keeps calling for Copper. But the dog's not here. Must have lived, must have died somewhere else." Clara finally looked at Daniel. "Why do you ask?" "Because if you're going to tell me about them, I should at least know their names." Something in Clara's face crumbled and rebuilt itself in the span of a heartbeat. She turned back to the window, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick. "His name was Thomas Whitfield. He liked to whistle. He's wearing brown boots that are too big for him, probably his father's, and he's scared. So scared. But he won't leave until he finds Copper." Daniel pulled on his coat. "Then we'd better help him look." Clara stared at him. "You can't see him. You can't hear him. How can you help? You can see him. You can hear him. Tell me where to look." They spent the next hour walking the property, Clara pointing to places she said Thomas had already searched, Daniel checking the old shed, the collapsed root cellar, the hollow beneath the oak. They found no dog, living or dead, but Clara said Thomas followed them, hopeful, his small form trudging through snow only she could see. Finally, near the creek bed, Daniel found something. A leather collar, rotted and ancient, caught in the exposed roots of a willow. Stamped into the leather, barely legible. Copper. He brought it to Clara. She held it in both hands, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "He's here. Thomas sees it. He's—" She closed her eyes. "He's smiling. He's picking up the collar, and he's smiling, and he's—" Her voice broke. "He's fading. He's finally going." Daniel stood beside her in the snow, watching her cry for a child who'd been dead 60 years, and understood something fundamental. Clara didn't just see the dead. She carried their grief until she could set it down somewhere safe. That evening, after Moses had been settled for the night, Daniel and Clara sat by the fire. The house creaked around them, settling into the cold. Clara held a cup of real tea this time, sipping slowly, her eyes distant but present. "You must think I'm weak," she said finally, crying over ghosts. "I think you feel things most people don't have to feel. That's not a weakness. It feels like it sometimes, like I'm breaking under the weight of all these stories, all these people who can't let go." She stared into the fire. "Do you know what the hardest part is? It's not seeing them. It's knowing I can't save them, can't bring them back, can't give them what they really want. I can only help them accept what they've lost." Daniel poked at the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "I know something about that. About loss. About watching someone slip away and being powerless to stop it." He set down the poker. "My father wasn't always like he is now. 3 years ago, he was the strongest man I knew, could lift a plough blade by himself, work dawn to dusk without complaint. Then, one morning, I found him on the floor of the barn, half his face frozen, speech gone, right side paralyzed. Daniel's hands tightened on his knees. Doctor said it was a stroke. Said he might recover some, might not. Said to make him comfortable. You've been caring for him alone all this time? My brother left for California before I was born. My sister married and moved to Boston. Didn't seem right to ask her to come back and give up her life. So I stayed. Learned how to feed him, dress him, understand what he needs when he can't say it. Daniel looked at Moses's empty chair. Some days I catch him looking at me, and I can see everything he wants to say trapped behind eyes that still work while the rest of him doesn't. That's its own kind of haunting. Clara set down her teacup and moved to sit beside him instead of across from him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. You're a good son. I'm a tired son. Those aren't mutually exclusive. They sat in silence, the kind that felt full rather than empty. Then Clara said, I had a brother once. Jacob. He was older by 4 years. He didn't see what I saw, but he never treated me like I was broken. When I'd wake up screaming from nightmares, he'd sit with me until dawn. When the other children threw rocks and called me a witch, he bloodied their noses. Her voice softened with memory. He was the only one who believed me, who said maybe the world was bigger and stranger than anyone knew. What happened to him? He took sick when I was 13. Fever that wouldn't break. I sat beside his bed for 3 days, and on the 3rd night, I saw it. A woman in grey standing in the corner of his room, waiting. I knew what she was. Knew why she'd come. Clara's hands twisted together. I begged her to leave, offered to go with her instead. She just looked at me with these sad, ancient eyes and shook her head. When morning came, Jacob was gone. And the woman? Gone too. But I saw her again years later, standing beside other deathbeds. I learned her name eventually. Not a name anyone living gave her, but one the dead all know. Clara looked at Daniel. Death isn't a force. It's a person. And she's been following me since I was 13 years old. Daniel should have scoffed, should have dismissed it as delusion or metaphor. But sitting there beside Clara, feeling the weight of her truth, he found he couldn't. Does she frighten you? Not anymore. Now she just makes me sad. Because I know that everyone I love, eventually she'll come for them too. And I'll see her standing there, waiting, and there won't be anything I can do. Is that why you don't let people close? Because you'll see her coming for them? Clara turned to him, surprised. How did you know? Because I do the same thing. Keep people at arm's length so it won't hurt so much when they leave. He met her eyes. My mother used to say I built walls so high even birds couldn't roost there. Did it work? Keeping people out? No. Just made me lonely. Clara smiled, sad and knowing. Me too. The fire popped, and in its light, Daniel saw Clara not as the strange, damaged woman the town believed her to be, but as someone who'd been carrying impossible weight alone for too long. Someone who'd been punished for a gift she never asked for. Someone who deserved, at the very least, to be believed. Tell me something good, he said suddenly, about your life before. Something that made you happy. Clara thought for a moment. My grandmother taught me to make bread when I was 6. She'd let me knead the dough even though I made a mess of it. She said bread was magic because you put in flour and water and what you got back was sustenance and comfort. Clara's expression softened. She died when I was 9, but sometimes when I'm making bread, I swear I can feel her hands over mine, guiding me, still teaching me. Is that her ghost? No, she's long gone. That's just a memory. But sometimes memory is sweeter than hauntings. Daniel found himself smiling. My father taught me to whistle. Took me weeks to get it right. I'd practice until my lips were sore, and he'd just laugh and say, "You sound like a dying owl." Boy. But he kept teaching me until I could whistle any tune I heard. Can you still do it? Haven't tried in years. Try now. Daniel felt suddenly self-conscious. But Clara was watching him with such open curiosity that he couldn't refuse. He pursed his lips and whistled a few bars of an old folk song his mother used to hum. The notes came out rusty but true. Clara laughed, and it transformed her face. "That's beautiful. My brother used to whistle just like that. He'd whistle while he worked, while he walked, drove my mother to distraction." Her smile faded slightly. "I haven't heard whistling in years." "Thank you. Any time you want to hear dying owl impressions, just ask." She laughed again, and Daniel realized with a start that he was flirting, that they were sitting close in the firelight, sharing stories and laughter, and it felt dangerously like the beginning of something he'd long ago decided wasn't meant for him. Clara seemed to realize it too, because she pulled back slightly, though not far. "Daniel, I need to tell you something." "All right." "The man in the barn, the one who fell, he's getting angrier. I've tried to help him move on, but he won't listen. He's convinced he was murdered, convinced someone needs to pay." She twisted her hands together. "Angry spirits can be dangerous. Not physically, but they can make people feel things. Fear, rage, despair. They press on the living until the living break." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you start feeling strange, angry for no reason, or hopeless or violent, you need to tell me. Because it might not be you. It might be him bleeding through." Daniel nodded slowly. "I'll watch for it." "And Daniel, if it gets bad, if you think I'm making it worse by being here, you have to send me away." "I'm not sending you away." "You might have to." "I won't." Clara looked at him with such desperate gratitude that Daniel had to look away. The moment stretched, taut as wire. Then Moses made a sound from his room upstairs, a low moan that meant nightmare or pain or both. Daniel rose immediately. "I should check on him." "Let me," Clara said, standing. "I'll sit with him a while." She disappeared upstairs, and Daniel heard the murmur of her voice reading something soothing. He stood by the fire, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions in his chest. Fear and hope and longing, all knotted together until he couldn't tell where one ended and another began. The next morning, Clara taught Daniel how to make the herb poultices she'd been using on Moses's bed sores. She showed him which plants to harvest, how to dry them properly, how to grind and mix them with tallow into a salve that actually worked better than anything the doctor had prescribed. "Your grandmother taught you this?" Daniel asked, watching her deft fingers work. "Her and the spirits. Some of them were healers in life. They remember things, remedies that have been forgotten. They teach me, and I pass it on." She handed him the pestle. "Your turn. You need to grind it fine, but not so fine that it loses its texture." Daniel took over, and Clara guided his hands with her own, showing him the right pressure and rhythm. Her touch was light, clinical, but it still sent awareness through him like current. When she finally stepped back, he found he could still feel the ghost of her fingers on his wrists. "There," she said, examining his work. "That's perfect. You're a quick study. I have a good teacher." They worked in companionable silence after that, bottling the salve, cleaning the workspace. Daniel found himself watching the way Clara moved, economical and sure, every gesture purposeful. She'd gained weight since arriving, her face filling out, color returning to her cheeks. She no longer looked like someone starving, she looked alive. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked, catching him staring. "That you look healthier. Stronger. I feel stronger. This place." She looked around the kitchen. "It's the first place that's ever felt safe. Like I can breathe without everyone watching, waiting for me to prove them right about what I am." "And what are you?" Clara met his eyes. "I don't know. Cursed, maybe. Blessed, possibly. Strange, certainly. But here, with you and Moses, I'm also just Clara. And I haven't been just Clara since I was a child." Daniel wanted to tell her that she could be just Clara here for as long as she wanted, that she belonged here. that he was starting to realize how empty his life had been before she arrived. But the words caught in his throat, too large and true to release. Instead, he said, "Moses likes having you here, hasn't been this content in years. And you? I like it too." Clara smiled, small but real. "Good. Because I like being here." That afternoon, while Daniel repaired a section of fence damaged by deer, Clara appeared at his side with water and cornbread. She sat on a fallen log while he worked, not speaking, just present. After a while, she began to hum the tune he'd whistled the night before. "You remembered it," he said. "I remember everything you tell me, everything you show me." She pulled her shawl tighter against the wind. "That's the thing about memory. We think we control what we keep and what we forget, but really the important things stay whether we want them to or not." Daniel hammered in a new post. "Is that good or bad?" "Both. I remember every person I've ever seen die, every ghost who's ever spoken to me. I carry all of them, all the time." She paused. "But I also remember the good things." Jacob's laugh. "My grandmother's hands, your whistle, and those memories make the heavy ones bearable. Do you remember the first ghost you ever saw?" Clara nodded. "I was 4, an old woman standing in our garden, wearing a dress from another century. She was crying. I walked up to her and asked why she was sad. She looked so surprised that someone could see her. She told me she'd lived in our house 100 years ago, that she'd buried her baby in the garden and couldn't remember where. I asked my father about it, and he got angry, said I was making up stories for attention." Clara's voice grew quiet. 3 days later, they were digging a new flower bed and found a tiny skeleton wrapped in cloth, dated to the 1700s. "What happened to the woman?" "She thanked me, and then she was gone." Clara looked at Daniel. "That's when I learned that the dead just want to be remembered. Want someone to acknowledge that they existed, that they mattered. I can give them that, even if I can't give them anything else." Daniel sat beside her on the log, shoulder to shoulder. "Then what you do isn't a curse. It's mercy. You're the only person who's ever said that. Then everyone else is still a fool." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, just for a moment. Just long enough for Daniel to feel the trust in that gesture, the vulnerability. Then she pulled back and stood. "Fence won't fix itself." "No, but it's more enjoyable with company." They worked together until sunset, painted the sky orange and purple. When they walked back to the house, their shadows stretched long before them, and for the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel like a man walking alone. That night, he woke to find Clara standing at the foot of his bed, but this time her eyes were open and aware. "Daniel," she whispered, "she's here." "Who?" "Death. She's downstairs. With your father." Daniel's heart seized. He was on his feet instantly, rushing for the door. Clara caught his arm. "Wait. She's not taking him. Not yet. She's just visiting." Reminding him she's patient. Clara's grip tightened. "But he's scared. He needs you." They went downstairs together. Moses sat in his chair by the banked fire, eyes wide, chest heaving. Daniel knelt beside him, taking his father's hand. "I'm here, Pa. I'm right here." Moses's eyes darted to the corner of the room, then back to Daniel. He made desperate sounds, trying to speak. "He sees her," Clara said softly, standing behind Daniel. "I think at the edge, when you're close to dying, everyone can see her, and he knows she's coming soon." "How soon?" "She won't say, but soon enough she's introducing herself." Daniel held his father's hand tighter. "Not yet. He's not ready yet." Clara knelt beside them both. "She knows. That's why she's not taking him now. But Daniel," she looked at him with infinite sadness, "when she comes back, she won't be visiting. And there's nothing I can do to stop her." Moses gripped Daniel's hand with surprising strength, his eyes pleading. Daniel understood. His father wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of leaving Daniel alone. "I won't be alone," Daniel said, though his voice shook. "Clara's here. I have help now. I'll be all right, Pa. I promise you, I'll be all right." Moses's eyes shifted to Clara, questioning. She took his other hand. "I'm staying. As long as he'll have me, I'm staying." Something in Moses relaxed. His breathing slowed, his grip loosened. He looked once more at the empty corner, then closed his eyes and slept. Daniel and Clara stayed there until dawn, hands joined over Moses's sleeping form, keeping watch against a darkness only one of them could see. And when morning came, the woman in grey was gone. But they all knew she'd be back. The Reverend arrived on a Tuesday morning, accompanied by 3 town elders. Daniel saw them coming from the barn, 4 dark figures against fresh snow, and knew immediately this wasn't a social call. He set down the harness he'd been mending and walked to meet them before they reached the house. Reverend Walsh was a man of 60 with silver hair and the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile. Beside him stood Edmund Porter, who owned the grain mill, James Caldwell from the bank, and Dr. Thornton, whose medical practice served 3 counties. Men of influence, men who shaped opinion. "Daniel," Walsh said, his breath clouding white, "we need to speak with you. About the girl. Clara has a name. We're aware." Porter shifted his weight, boots crunching snow. "We're here out of concern. For you, for the community, for the natural order of things." Daniel crossed his arms. "Say what you came to say." Walsh pulled a folded paper from his coat. "We've drafted a petition. 17 families have signed it, requesting that Miss Whitmore be removed from Millbrook Creek for the protection of its citizens. We're asking you to cooperate voluntarily before we're forced to involve the county authorities." "On what grounds?" "She's a danger," Caldwell said flatly. "My wife won't let our children near this property. Says the girl is possessed, that she speaks in tongues, that she wanders at night communing with dark forces. She walks in her sleep. That's not possession, that's illness." Dr. Thornton stepped forward, his voice more measured. "Daniel, I've read about cases like this, somnambulism combined with delusions of spiritual contact. It's a serious mental affliction. She needs institutional care, not isolation in a farmhouse. At best, she's a danger to herself. At worst—" He let the implication hang. "At worst—" "What?" "Say it plain." "At worst, she's spreading hysteria," Walsh finished. 3 families have reported disturbances since she arrived. Children having nightmares about dead people standing in their rooms, women hearing voices where no one stands. This kind of spiritual contagion is real, Daniel, and it spreads through communities like plague. Daniel kept his voice level, though anger burned in his chest. Or children have nightmares because their parents tell them ghost stories about the strange woman on the hill. Hysteria doesn't come from Clara. It comes from fear-mongering. "Then explain the incidents," Porter demanded. "George Mitchell's barn burned last week. He said he saw a figure in white just before the fire started. Description matches your guest. Clara was here, with me, all night. You're certain of that?" Daniel hesitated half a second too long. The truth was, he'd been in the barn himself that night, tending a sick horse. Clara had been in the house, but he couldn't swear she hadn't walked out while he was occupied. The men saw his hesitation and pounced on it. "You can't vouch for her every moment," Walsh said. "None of us can control what happens when we sleep, but most of us don't wake up miles from home with no memory of how we got there. What happens if she wanders into someone's house? What happens if someone mistakes her for an intruder and shoots her? Or worse, what if she's the one who does harm while in one of her trances? She hasn't harmed anyone, yet," Caldwell said. "The word is yet, Daniel. But you're playing dice with other people's safety." Dr. Thornton spoke again, his tone almost gentle. "I can arrange for her admission to the sanitarium in Cooperstown. It's clean, well managed. They have experience with cases like hers. She'd be safe there, properly cared for by people trained in these matters. You mean locked up? I mean treated. There are new therapies, medications that can help with delusions and sleep disturbances. Daniel looked at each man in turn. He saw genuine concern in Thornton's face, righteous certainty in Walsh's, and something darker in Porter and Caldwell, fear dressed up as civic duty. Is that what this is really about? Treatment? Or are you afraid of what you don't understand? We're afraid of what we do understand, Walsh said. That girl traffics with the dead. Whether through mental illness or darker means, doesn't change the effect. She's a disruption to the peace and godliness of this community. She's a woman who needed help. That's all. Then help her by letting professionals take over her care. Walsh extended the petition. Sign this. Agree to her removal. We'll handle the rest with compassion and discretion. Daniel didn't. Take the paper. And if I refuse? Then we involve the county, Caldwell said. They can declare her a public danger and remove her by force. It won't be pleasant for anyone, least of all her. You'd traumatize a sick woman to make yourselves feel safe? We'd protect our families, Porter snapped. Something you seem to have forgotten how to do. Your mother would be ashamed of what you've become, harboring this creature. Daniel moved fast, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. He didn't touch Porter, but his size and proximity were threat enough. Finish that sentence, please. Porter paled and stepped back. Walsh quickly intervened. Gentlemen, please, this doesn't have to be adversarial. Daniel, we're giving you a choice. Work with us or force us to take action. Either way, that girl cannot remain here. From the house, a door opened. Clara stood on the porch, wrapped in her shawl, watching. Even from a distance, Daniel could see she understood exactly what was happening. Walsh saw her too. Miss Whitmore, would you be willing to speak with us? Clara descended the porch steps and walked toward them, her gait steady despite the snow. When she reached them, she looked at each man with those river-stone eyes that never wavered. You want me gone? We want what's best for everyone, Walsh said. Including you. What's best for me is having a home. For the first time in my life, I have a home. She gestured at the farmhouse. But you're right about one thing. I am sick. I do see things others don't. I do walk at night with no memory of where I've been, and I understand why that frightens you. Then you'll come voluntarily? Thornton asked, hope in his voice. No. Clara's voice was quiet but absolute. Because I've been to places like your sanitarium. I've been strapped to beds and force-fed laudanum until I couldn't remember my own name. I've had ice baths and isolation and prayer sessions that lasted until I collapsed. She pulled aside her sleeve, revealing faint scars on her wrist. I've been healed by every method you can imagine, and none of them worked because there's nothing to heal. This is who I am. This is who I'll always be. Walsh's face hardened. Then you admit you're beyond help. I admit that your kind of help is worse than my affliction, Miss Whitmore. If I'm such a danger, why hasn't anyone actually been harmed? George Mitchell's barn was struck by lightning. You can verify that. With the scorch marks on the roof. 3 families have nightmares because you've told them I'm a monster. The only contagion here is fear, and you're the ones spreading it. She turned to Daniel. But he's right about one thing. I am putting you at risk. They'll come after you to get to me. Let them come. Daniel, I said let them come. I'm not letting them take you. Clara's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She simply turned back to the men. You have your answer. Walsh folded the petition carefully. Then you. Leave us no choice. We'll be petitioning the county judge for a writ of removal on the grounds of public safety and mental incompetence. It will take a week, perhaps 2. When it's granted, and it will be granted, the marshal will come, and if either of you resist, you'll both be arrested. He looked at Daniel. I'm sorry it's come to this. Your family has been part of this community for 3 generations. Don't throw that away for a stranger. She's not a stranger anymore." The men left, their dark figures retreating across white fields. Daniel and Clara stood in the cold long after they'd disappeared, neither speaking. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "You need to let me go." "No. Daniel, they'll destroy you. They'll take your land, your livelihood, everything your family built. They'll make you an outcast. I'm already an outcast, been one since my mother died, and I stayed here instead of living like a normal man my age. One more reason for them to avoid me won't make much difference. It's not just avoidance. They'll come with force. Then I'll deal with force." He finally looked at her. "You said this was the first place that felt like home. You think I'm going to take that away from you because some frightened men made threats? It's not just threats. They have the law on their side. The law's been wrong before." Clara laughed, bitter and sharp. "You can't fight the whole world for me. Watch me." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to face her fully. "Listen to me. I care about you too much to let you throw your life away. If I leave voluntarily, they'll leave you alone. You can go back to your life, tend your father, work your land in peace." "What life?" "The one where I sit in this empty house counting days until I die, where the only conversation I have is with a man who can't speak back. That's not living, Clara. That's just not dying yet." His voice dropped. "You think I don't know what you've brought to this place? It's not haunting. It's not darkness. It's life, purpose. Someone to cook for, to talk with, to care about. You think I want to go back to before? It would be safer. I don't want to be safe. I want this. I want you here. I want to wake up and hear you moving around downstairs. I want to find you reading to my father. I want to argue about how to stack firewood and whether beans need salt." His hands found her shoulders. "I want all of it, Clara. The sleepwalking and the ghosts and the midnight vigils. All of it. Because all of it is you." Clara's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You don't know what you're asking for." "Yes, I do. I'm asking for you to stay. To let me fight for something that matters instead of just surviving another winter." He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Let me be selfish for once. Let me choose what I want instead of what's expected." She leaned into his touch, eyes closing. "This will get worse before it gets better. I know. They'll say terrible things about you. Let them. They might take everything from you. They can't take what matters." She opened her eyes, searching his face. "And what matters? You, my father, this farm," in that order. Something passed between them then, something that didn't need words. Clara nodded once, acceptance and surrender and determination all at once. "Then we face it together. Together." They walked back to the house, hand in hand. And if Moses noticed when they came inside, he noticed how Clara's eyes were red and Daniel's jaw was set with stubborn resolve. He said nothing. Just watched them with his sharp eyes and nodded to himself, as if confirming something he'd already known. That night, the first rock came through the window. It was small, wrapped in paper, thrown hard enough to shatter glass, but not hard enough to reach the far wall. Daniel found it among the shards, a stone from the creek bed, and wrapped around it a note in crude letters: "Witch, leave or burn." Clara stood in the doorway of her room, staring at the broken window, the rock, the message. Her face had gone pale, but calm, as if she'd been expecting this. "Pack what matters," Daniel said, sweeping up glass. "We're barricading the lower windows tonight. They're escalating. I noticed. Daniel, this is your last chance to change your mind. If you send me away now, you can still claim you were deceived, that you didn't know what I was. They'll forgive you." He looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who saw the dead, who walked in darkness, who'd been cast out by everyone who should have protected her. This woman who'd brought warmth back to his cold house and purpose back to his empty days. This woman who'd somehow become essential to him in the space of a few short months. "I don't want their forgiveness," he said. "I want you. Here, safe, for as long as you'll stay." Clara crossed the room, glass crunching under her feet, and kissed him. It was brief, chaste, but it held everything they hadn't yet said aloud. When she pulled back, she whispered, "Then we'd better prepare for war." They spent the night boarding up the lower windows, stacking firewood against the doors, preparing the house for siege. Moses watched from his chair, and though he couldn't speak, his eyes spoke volumes. Pride, concern, and something else. Recognition, perhaps, that his son had finally found something worth fighting for. As dawn broke grey and cold, Daniel stood on the porch with his father's old rifle across his knees. Clara sat beside him, wide awake, watching the road. They didn't know when the mob would come, or the marshal, or whatever force the town would send against them. But they knew it was coming, and they'd be ready. 3 days passed without incident. No more rocks, no visitors, just the thick silence of winter and waiting. Daniel taught Clara to shoot. They stood in the back field where the forest created a natural backstop, snow crunching beneath their boots. The rifle was heavy in her hands, unfamiliar, but she held it the way he showed her, stock firm against her shoulder, cheek pressed to the wood, one eye closed. "Breathe out slowly," Daniel said, standing close behind her, his hands guiding her arms into position. "Squeeze the trigger, don't pull. Let it surprise you." The shot cracked loud across the empty field. The tin can 20 yards out jumped and spun. Clara lowered the rifle, eyes wide with something between fear and exhilaration. "Again," Daniel said. By the end of the hour, she could hit 4 out of 5 cans. Her shoulder would be bruised from the recoil, but her hands were steady and her eyes were clear. When they walked back to the house, she carried the rifle with new confidence. "I never thought I'd need to know this," she said. "Hope you never do, but hope isn't a plan." That night, Clara taught him something in return. They sat in the dark sitting room, only a firelight between them, and she took his hands in hers. "Close your eyes," she said. "Clara, trust me." He closed his eyes, her thumbs pressed into his palms, and she spoke in a whisper. "Breathe with me. Slow. In and out. Let everything else fall away except this moment, this breath." Daniel felt foolish at first, sitting in darkness, while Clara held his hands like a child. But gradually, as his breathing matched hers, something shifted. The constant worry that had been his companion for years began to recede. The anger at the town, the fear of what was coming, even the grief for his mother, all of it loosened its grip, just slightly. "Now," Clara whispered, "tell me what you feel. Calm, centered, look deeper. What do you feel in this room?" Daniel focused, and suddenly he was aware of things he'd never noticed before. The weight of his father sleeping upstairs, a presence warm and familiar. The older weight of the house itself, generations of lives lived within these walls. And something else, something cold and angry at the edge of his awareness. His eyes snapped open. "There's something in the barn," Clara nodded. "The angry one, the man who fell. He's been getting stronger, feeding on the tension. You feel him now because you're finally quiet enough to listen. Is he dangerous? Not to us. Not yet. But anger like that doesn't just disappear. It builds until it breaks something." She released his hands. "That's what I wanted to teach you, how to feel what I feel. You can't see them like I do, but you can sense them if you learn to be still." Daniel looked at his hands, at the woman sitting across from him who'd just opened a door he didn't know existed. "Why teach me this? Because if something happens to me, someone needs to know. Someone needs to be able to help them." Her voice was quiet. "The dead don't stop needing help just because I'm gone. You're not going anywhere, maybe not by choice. But Daniel, if they take me, if I'm locked away somewhere, these spirits will still be here, and they'll be lost, without someone to see them." She leaned forward. "Promise me, if I'm gone, you'll learn to listen, you'll help them, I promise." "But you're staying right here," Clara smiled sadly. "We'll see what the world allows." The next morning, Daniel was splitting wood when Clara appeared with something wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it carefully, a hunting knife, old but well-maintained, with symbols carved into the handle. "This was my brother's," she said. "He carried it everywhere. Said it made him feel safe." She offered it to Daniel. "I want you to have it." Daniel examined the knife. The symbols were strange, curving and angular in ways that suggested they meant something specific. "What are these?" "Protection marks. My grandmother carved them. She said, 'Symbols have power if you believe in them.' I don't know if that's true, but Jacob believed it, and he was never afraid of anything." Clara closed Daniel's fingers around the handle. "Keep it with you." "Please." He slid the knife into his belt. "I'll keep it safe. Not safe. Sharp. There's a difference." She met his eyes. "I'm not asking you to treasure it. I'm asking you to use it, if you need to." The intimacy of the gift struck him. This wasn't just a tool, it was a piece of her history, her family, her loss. She was giving him something that mattered, trusting him with it. "Thank you," he said quietly. She touched his chest, right over his heart. "You're welcome." They worked side by side more now, falling into rhythms that felt ancient despite their newness. Clara would cook while Daniel tended Moses. Daniel would chop wood while Clara mended clothes. They moved around each other in the small house with an ease that spoke of comfort, of belonging. Moses watched it all with knowing eyes. One afternoon, while Clara was outside hanging laundry, the old man caught Daniel's sleeve and pulled him close. He couldn't speak, but his eyes said everything. "This one. Keep this one. Don't let her go." "I'm trying, Pa," Daniel said. Moses nodded and patted his son's hand. Then he pointed to his own chest, to his heart, and then pointed at Clara through the window. The message was clear. Love her, while you still can. That evening, Daniel found Clara in the barn, standing very still, staring at the empty loft. The air felt heavy, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. "He's here," she said without turning. "The angry one. He's showing me what happened." Daniel moved beside her. "What do you see?" "Two men, brothers. They were arguing about money, about land. One pushed the other. It was meant to stun, not kill, but—" She gestured to the loft. "He fell wrong, broke his neck. The brother who pushed him buried the body in the woods and told everyone he'd run off. That was 1896. The dead man has been here ever since, too angry to leave. What does he want? Justice, revenge, recognition that he was murdered." Clara finally looked at Daniel. "But his brother died at 1904. There's no one left to punish, so his anger just sits here, rotting everything it touches. Can you help him?" "I've tried, but he won't listen. He's too far gone into his rage," she shivered. "The night they come for me, he's going to use it. Going to feed on the fear and anger and make everything worse. Then we stop them before they get here." "How?" Daniel thought for a moment. "We make them see you're not a threat. Show them you're helping people, not hurting them." Clara laughed, but it was hollow. "They don't want to see that. They've already decided what I am. Then we make them undecide." Over the next 2 days, they worked on a plan. Clara would publicly help someone, prove her value to the community. It was risky. It meant going into town, exposing herself to judgment and potential violence, but staying hidden only confirmed their fears. The opportunity came when young Timothy Shaw, the blacksmith's son, fell through creek ice while playing. He was pulled out alive, but was slipping into fever by nightfall. Dr. Thornton tried everything, but the fever climbed. By the second day, the boy was delirious, and the doctor privately told the parents to prepare for the worst. Clara heard about it from a traveling peddler who stopped at the farm for water. She listened to the story, then turned to Daniel. "I can help him. The town won't let you near him. They will if he's dying and they're out of options." She was already gathering her herbs, preparing poultices. Sometimes people only accept help when they're desperate. Daniel tried to argue, but she was right. If the boy died without her trying, she'd be blamed anyway. At least this way, there was a chance of changing minds. They rode into town at dusk. The streets were quiet, windows lit against gathering dark. When they stopped at the blacksmith's house, Mrs. Shaw opened the door with eyes swollen from crying. "Please," Clara said simply. "Let me try." Mrs. Shaw looked at her husband, a huge man named Frederick, who stood behind her with shoulders slumped in defeat. He stared at Clara with something between hope and suspicion. "Doctor, Thornton says there's nothing more he can do," Frederick said finally. "If you can help my boy, I don't care what they say about you." Clara worked through the night. Daniel waited outside with Frederick, listening to the murmured prayers from inside, the sounds of Clara moving, mixing, speaking in low tones. Hours passed. The moon tracked across the sky. Just before dawn, Clara emerged. She was exhausted, face pale, but her eyes were clear. "The fever's broken. He'll need rest and liquids, but he'll survive." Mrs. Shaw appeared in the doorway behind her, tears streaming. He opened his eyes. "He knew me. Oh God, he knew me." Frederick Shaw stood very still, then slowly removed his hat. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." "You owe me nothing." "Just," Clara hesitated, "just tell people what happened. Tell them the truth." "I will. I swear it." Word spread fast. By midday, half the town knew Clara Whitmore had saved Timothy Shaw when the doctor couldn't. Opinion began to shift, slowly, grudgingly, but it shifted. People whispered that maybe she wasn't evil after all. Maybe she was just strange, and strange wasn't the same as dangerous. But not everyone was convinced. That night, as Daniel and Clara returned home, they found Reverend Walsh waiting on their porch. "A fortunate outcome with the Shaw boy," he said without preamble. "Though, I wonder what methods you employed. Herbs can heal, but so can darker arts." Clara met his gaze steadily. "I used knowledge passed down through my family. Plants, temperatures, prayers, nothing darker than what any midwife would use. And yet, you claim to speak with the dead, to see spirits. That's not herbalism, Miss Whitmore. That's necromancy. Call it what you want. The boy lives." Walsh stepped closer. "One good deed doesn't erase the concerns. The petition still stands. The judge will rule within the week." He looked at Daniel. "It's not too late to distance yourself from this. Send her to the sanitarium voluntarily. Show the community you're reasonable. I'm done being reasonable with people who won't extend the same courtesy." Walsh sighed. "Then you've both chosen your path. When the marshal comes, remember that I gave you every chance to avoid this." He left, and Clara sagged against Daniel's shoulder. "We bought time, maybe a week, but not freedom." Daniel wrapped his arm around her. "Then we make the most of the week we have." They spent that week in preparation, but also in presence. They cooked together, creating elaborate meals just because they could. They read aloud by the fire, taking turns with books from his mother's shelf. They walked the property in afternoon light, pointing out birds and tracks in snow, speaking of everything and nothing. One evening, Clara taught Daniel to dance. There was no music, just her humming a waltz while she showed him the steps in the sitting room. He was clumsy at first, all heavy feet and uncertain hands, but she laughed and guided him until they moved together with something approaching grace. "Where did you learn to dance?" he asked. "My mother taught me. Before everything went wrong, she used to say that dancing was prayer in motion, that God appreciated beauty in all its forms." Clara's voice softened with memory. She stopped believing that after I started seeing the dead, stopped believing in a lot of things. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe God appreciates you exactly as you are. Clara looked up at him, and in the firelight, she was beautiful. Not despite her strangeness, but because of it, because everything that made her different also made her real, in a way most people never managed. "Daniel Mercer," she said softly, "when did you become a philosopher?" "Right around the time you became essential." She kissed him then, properly this time, and when they finally pulled apart, Moses was clapping his one good hand against his chair, a lopsided smile on his face. They laughed, and the sound filled the house with something that had been missing for too long, joy. But outside, in the barn, the angry spirit paced and watched and waited, and on the road to town, the marshal received his orders and began the ride toward Millbrook Creek. The week of grace was ending. The reckoning was coming, and whatever happened next would change everything. The marshal came on Sunday, which felt like deliberate cruelty, taking someone from their home on the day of rest. But Marshal Grant Hutchins wasn't a man who concerned himself with symbolism. He arrived with 6 deputies, all armed, and a writ signed by County Judge Morrison authorizing Clara's removal by force if necessary. Daniel saw them from the window, 7 horses, 7 men, riding in formation like soldiers. He touched the knife at his belt, felt its weight, then looked at Clara. She stood in the center of the room, perfectly still, head tilted as if listening to something beyond hearing. "They're all here," she whispered. "Every spirit on this land. They've been gathering since dawn." "How many?" "Dozens. The woman from the station, Thomas Whitfield and his dog. Martha Hensley. All the ones I've helped." Her eyes found his. "And the angry one from the barn. He's stronger than all the rest combined." Moses made an urgent sound from his chair. Daniel moved to him, saw the fear in his father's eyes. Not fear for himself, but for them. "Stay here, Pa. No matter what happens, you stay in this chair." The knock came hard and authoritative. Daniel opened the door to find Marshal Hutchins, a square-jawed man of 50 with grey in his mustache and no mercy in his eyes. "Daniel Mercer, I have a writ for the removal of Clara Whitmore to the Cooperstown Sanitarium for evaluation and treatment. You will produce her immediately." "No!" Hutchins's expression didn't change. "This isn't a request, it's a legal order. Interfere, and you'll be arrested for obstruction. Then arrest me. Don't be foolish, son. We're taking her either way. You can make it easy or make it hard, but the ending's the same." Clara appeared at Daniel's shoulder. "I'll go. I don't want blood shed over me." "Clara, it's all right." She touched his arm. "I've been in places like that before. I survived then. I'll survive now. Like hell you will." Daniel turned back to Hutchins. "You're not taking her. Deputies," Hutchins said calmly, and 3 men dismounted, hands moving to their weapons. That's when the temperature dropped. It happened instantly, dramatically, from winter cold to something arctic and unnatural. Breath clouded white. Frost crawled across the porch boards, spreading like spilled ink. One deputy gasped, his rifle suddenly too cold to hold, and dropped it with a clatter. "What in God's name?" Hutchins started. Clara's voice cut through, clear and commanding in a way Daniel had never heard before. "You need to leave, now, before they get angry." "Before who gets angry?" "The dead you're standing on." Hutchins laughed, but was nervous. "More of your tricks, girl? I'm not impressed by parlor games." The barn door swung open with a bang that echoed across the property. No wind had touched it, no hand had moved it. It simply opened, and from within came a sound like rage, given voice, a howl that wasn't quite human, full of decades of fury and injustice. The horses screamed and reared. 2 deputies were thrown immediately. The others fought to control their mounts while the temperature continued to plummet. Ice formed on the water trough, on the deputies' coats, on the marshal's mustache. "Call it off!" Hutchins shouted at Clara. "Whatever you're doing, stop it. I'm not doing anything. I'm just the only one who can hear them. And right now, they're telling me that no one takes me from this land." Clara stepped forward onto the porch. "The man in the barn died at 1896. His brother murdered him and buried his body in the woods. He's been waiting for someone to acknowledge what happened, to give him justice. This is insanity." His name was Robert Crawford. His brother was named Samuel. If you don't believe me, check the county records. Samuel Crawford owned this land before Daniel's grandfather bought it. Samuel claimed Robert ran off to Montana, but Robert's body is buried beneath the oak tree 50 yards north of here. The one that fell in the storm. Daniel stared at her. She'd never told him the dead man's name, never mentioned the specifics. Hutchins pulled his coat tighter against the unnatural cold. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change." The water trough exploded, not from heat, but from ice expanding inside it, shattering the wood like it was paper. Frozen shards flew, striking one deputy in the face, drawing blood. "Mother Mary," someone whispered. Clara's eyes had changed. They were darker now, or perhaps it was that something else looked through them. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics, as if multiple people spoke through her mouth at once. "You came to take her because you fear what you don't understand. But we understand fear. We lived it, died in it. And we will not let you take the only person who sees us, who hears us, who gives us peace." The voices continued. "Leave this place. Tell your judge and your reverend that Clara Whitmore is under our protection. And if anyone tries to take her again, they'll face every soul buried in Millbrook Creek." One of the deputies made a sign against evil and backed toward his horse. Another was praying, rosary beads clicking in shaking hands. Hutchins tried to maintain authority. "I don't care what supernatural circus you've arranged. I have a legal order, and I will execute it." He took a step forward. The ground erupted. Not literally, no dirt flew, no roots burst upward. But something did rise, something visible even to those who couldn't normally see. Shadows took shape, dozens of them, forming a wall between Hutchins and the house. Human-shaped but translucent, they shimmered like heat haze. And in front of them all stood a figure more solid than the rest. A man in farmer's clothes from another era, his neck bent at an impossible angle, his eyes burning with decades of accumulated rage. Robert Crawford, the murdered brother. "Jesus Christ," a deputy whispered. The figure pointed at Hutchins, then at the road. The message was unmistakable. "Leave." Hutchins's hand moved to his pistol, but froze there. Even he, practical and skeptical, and backed by legal authority, could not deny what stood before him. Could not dismiss the cold that wasn't cold, the shapes that shouldn't exist, the absolute wrongness of the air itself. "This isn't over," he said, voice shaking despite himself. Clara, or what spoke through Clara, laughed. "For you it is. Robert has waited 28 years for someone to acknowledge his murder. Now he has. And in exchange, he will defend this place from anyone who comes with ill intent." The voices softened, became more human, more Clara. "Go home, Marshal. Tell them the truth, that you saw the dead rise to protect one of their own. Tell them that some battles can't be won with writs and guns." Hutchins retreated to his horse. His deputies were already mounted, some actually fleeing down the road. He pulled himself into the saddle and looked back at Clara with something between awe and terror. "You're not natural," he said. "No," Clara agreed, and now it was only her voice, small and tired. "But I'm not evil either. I'm just someone who stands between the living and the dead. And today, the dead stood for me." The marshal and his remaining men rode away fast, and the moment they crossed the property line, the temperature rose. The ice melted, the shadows faded. Clara collapsed. Daniel caught her before she hit the ground, lifted her, carried her inside. She was burning with fever despite the cold she'd been standing in, her skin slick with sweat. "Moses, get water," Daniel called, forgetting for a moment that his father couldn't move. He laid Clara on the couch and ran for water himself, brought it back, pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. Clara's eyes fluttered open. "Did they leave?" "They left. You scared them half to death." "I scared myself," she coughed. "That's never happened before. They've never used me like that, spoken through me. I could feel them all inside my head, their voices, their memories. I thought I was going to disappear into them, but you didn't. You came back. Because of you. I heard you calling me back." She gripped his hand. "The angry one, Robert, he's at peace now. His story was told. His death was acknowledged. He's gone. Really gone." Daniel felt it too. The barn no longer carried that weight of old rage. The air was lighter, cleaner. Moses wheeled himself close and reached out to touch Clara's hand. His eyes were wet. "We're all right," Clara told him. "All of us. We're all right." But even as she said it, a new sound reached them. Hoofbeats, lots of them, coming fast. Daniel went to the window and felt his stomach drop. It wasn't the marshal returning. It was half the town, Frederick Shaw, with 5 other men, riding hard, carrying torches. "No," Daniel breathed. "Not now. Not after everything." But as they drew closer, he saw something that stopped his words. They weren't carrying weapons, just torches. And their faces held no anger. Frederick reached the house first, dismounted, and strode to the porch. Daniel stepped out to meet him, ready to fight if necessary. Frederick held up his hands. "We're not here to harm anyone." Word reached town about what happened with the marshal, about what he saw. The big man's voice was rough with emotion. "My son is alive because of her. I'll be damned if I let anyone take her away. So we came, all of us who've been helped by her, or who know someone who was. We came to stand with you." The other men nodded. Daniel recognized them. Old Samuel Dutton, whose wife Clara had sat with through her final night. Martin Reeves, whose daughter's fever Clara had broken with herbs. Even young Tom Fletcher, who'd gotten lost in the woods and claimed a woman's voice had guided him home, a voice he now realized had been Clara's. Somehow, even though she'd been miles away. "The marshal will come back," Daniel said. "With more men, maybe soldiers. Let him come," Frederick said. "He'll have to go through all of us first." From behind Daniel, Clara appeared, wrapped in a blanket, still pale but standing. "You shouldn't risk yourselves for me. You're one of us now," Frederick said simply. "Millbrook Creek protects its own, even the strange ones. Maybe especially the strange ones." Tears slipped down Clara's cheeks. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything, just keep doing what you do. Help the living. Help the dead. We'll make sure you're here to do it." The men set up a perimeter around the property, torches burning bright against gathering dusk. Others would come in shifts, Frederick promised. No one would be left alone. If the marshal returned, he'd find a wall of citizens protecting one of their own. Inside, Daniel helped Clara back to the couch. She was exhausted, drained from channeling the dead, but her eyes were bright. "Did that really happen?" she whispered. "It did. They stood up for me. For us. You saved their children, healed their sick, gave peace to their dead." Daniel brushed hair from her face. "They finally see what I've seen all along, that you're not a curse, you're a gift." Clara pulled him down beside her, rested her head on his shoulder. "I was so scared. When they all came through me at once, I thought I'd lose myself, thought I'd become just another ghost. But you didn't. You're here. You're real. You're alive, because you held me to the world." She looked up at him. "You're my anchor, Daniel Mercer. The thing that keeps me from drifting away entirely." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Then, I'll keep holding. For as long as you need. Moses made a sound, something between a laugh and a sob. When they looked at him, he was smiling his crooked smile and nodding. His good hand made a gesture that clearly meant finally. They laughed, all three of them, and it felt like release after months of holding breath. Outside, the torches burned. The men stood watch. And somewhere beyond sight, the grateful dead kept their own vigil, protecting the woman who'd given them peace, ready to rise again if anyone threatened her. The judge could sign all the writs he wanted. The reverend could preach all the sermons he liked. The marshal could ride with 100 men. Clara Whitmore had something stronger than law or faith or force. She had people who loved her. She had the dead who owed her. And she had a man who would fight the world to keep her safe. The crisis had passed, but the story was far from over. Spring came early that year, as if winter itself had decided it had overstayed its welcome. Ice melted from the eaves in silver streams, mud replaced snow in the fields, and with the thaw came change. The marshal never returned. Word reached Millbrook Creek that County Judge Morrison had quietly withdrawn the removal order, citing insufficient grounds and community opposition. Reverend Walsh preached a sermon about tolerance that felt forced, but was at least an attempt. The petition disappeared, and those who'd signed it suddenly couldn't quite remember why they'd been so frightened. Clara became an accepted, if still peculiar, part of town life. Women began appearing at the farmhouse door with requests. Could she sit with a dying grandmother? Could she help locate a lost family heirloom? Could she determine if the strange sounds in the attic were spirits or simply rats? She helped them all. Never asked for payment, though they brought eggs and preserves and firewood anyway. Slowly, grudgingly, Millbrook Creek learned to live with the woman who spoke to the dead. But the real transformation happened in quieter ways. One April morning, Daniel woke to find Clara standing at the window of what had once been his mother's room, but was now simply her room. She wore her nightgown, but she was fully present, not walking in sleep, just watching the sunrise paint the fields gold. "I slept through the whole night," she said without turning. "First time in years. Didn't walk, didn't talk to anyone, just slept." Daniel moved to stand beside her. Maybe they're finally resting. All of them. Or maybe I'm finally at peace enough that they don't need to wake me. She leaned into him. "I used to think sleepwalking was my curse. But now I wonder if it was just me trying to help, even when my mind was shut down. And now that I help during the day, I don't need to help at night. That's good. That's healing. It's more than healing. It's living." She turned to face him. "Daniel, I want to marry you," he blinked. "I was going to ask you. Had a whole thing planned." "I know, but I'm asking you. Because I don't want to be the woman who gets saved. I want to be the woman who chooses. So I'm choosing you." Her eyes were clear and certain. "Will you marry me, Daniel Mercer?" He laughed, joy bubbling up from somewhere deep. "Yes. Absolutely yes." They married on a Thursday in May, because Thursday was Moses's favorite day of the week, and neither of them cared about tradition anyway. Frederick Shaw stood as witness. Mrs. Shaw brought flowers from her garden. A dozen townspeople came, more out of curiosity than celebration, but they came nonetheless. Reverend Walsh performed the ceremony with obvious reluctance, but he performed it. When it came time for vows, Clara spoke clearly. "I promise to see you, Daniel. Not just look at you, but truly see you, your kindness, your strength, your quiet courage. I promise to tell you the truth, even when it's strange. I promise to stand beside you in this world and help you navigate the next when your time comes. I promise to love you not despite my strangeness, but as part of it, because you're the first person who ever let me be whole." Daniel's vows were simpler. "I promise to be your home, for as long as you'll have me. When Walsh pronounced them married, Moses clapped so hard his good hand went red. The celebration was small cake and cider in the farmhouse that no longer felt empty. People left by dusk, and Daniel and Clara stood on the porch watching the last wagon disappear down the road. "Mrs. Mercer," Daniel said, testing the name. Clara smiled. "Has a nice sound to it." That night, in the room that had been his mother's and then Clara's and was now theirs, they lay together in darkness. Not making love yet that would come in its own time, but simply holding each other, talking in whispers about nothing and everything. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked. "Taking me in that day at the station? Every single day." She pulled back, hurt flickering across her face. "I regret," Daniel continued, "that I didn't do it sooner, that you suffered longer than necessary because I wasn't there to help." He pulled her back. "But taking you in? Keeping you here? Fighting for you? No, not for a second." She kissed him then, and the kiss became something more, and when morning came they woke tangled together, truly married in every sense. Summer brought its own rhythms. Clara tended her garden, which had grown to include not just herbs but vegetables and flowers. She taught Daniel the names of plants he'd walked past his entire life without knowing: foxglove, nightshade, angel's trumpet. Dangerous things, beautiful things, useful things. He taught her to ride, to fish, to read the weather in cloud formations. They worked the farm together, equal partners in the endless cycle of planting and harvesting. Moses grew weaker. It wasn't sudden, just gradual each week, a little less strength, a little more sleeping. Clara sat with him on good days, reading or just holding his hand. On bad days, she helped Daniel turn him so he wouldn't develop sores, helped feed him when swallowing became difficult. "She's close," Clara told Daniel one evening in July. "Death, she's been visiting him more often, making him comfortable with the idea." "How much longer?" "Not long, days maybe. He's ready, Daniel, he's tired." Daniel knew it was true. Had seen it in his father's eyes, love and gratitude and the deep exhaustion of someone who'd held on long enough. Moses died on a Tuesday morning, peacefully, with both of them beside him. One moment he was breathing, the next he wasn't, and the transition was so gentle that Daniel almost missed it. Clara touched Daniel's shoulder. "He's standing right there, by the window. He looks whole again. Young, strong, the way he must have been before the stroke." Daniel couldn't see him, but he felt something, a lightness in the room, a sense of release. "Is he happy?" Clara smiled through tears. "He's dancing. I think he's dancing with your mother. She came for him. She's been waiting all this time." Daniel broke then, grief and relief mixing into something too complex for words. He wept for his father, for his mother, for the years of struggle and the gift of peace at the end. Clara held him while he cried, and when he finally stopped, she whispered, "He says he's proud of you, says you're going to be a wonderful father." Daniel's head jerked up. "What?" Clara's hand moved to her stomach. "I wasn't sure. It's early. But he saw it before I did." She met Daniel's eyes. "We're going to have a baby." Joy and grief collided. Daniel pulled Clara close, held her like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world. He knew, and he's glad. Said the house needed new life, new voices. Clara's voice caught. "He's fading now. She's taking him somewhere I can't see, but he's not scared. He's grateful." They stood together until the room felt normal again, until whatever had been there was truly gone. Then they buried Moses in the family plot beside Daniel's mother, under the oak that had once hidden Martha Hensley's treasures. Half the town came to the funeral. People who'd ignored Moses for years suddenly remembered his kindness, his hard work, his contribution to the community. It was hypocritical, but Daniel appreciated it anyway. His father deserved to be remembered. That night in the quiet house, Clara said, I can still help the dead, but I think I'm meant to help the living now too. This baby, our family, that's my purpose now. You can do both, maybe, but I want to do this one first, want to be fully present for it. She took his hand. The dead will always be there, but this life, this moment, it only happens once. Autumn arrived with cool winds and changing leaves. Clara's belly grew. They prepared the upstairs room that had once been Daniel's childhood. Bedroom, painting it soft yellow, building a cradle from oak that Daniel's grandfather had cut decades ago. Word spread about the baby, and suddenly, Clara wasn't just tolerated, she was embraced. Women brought baby clothes and advice. Men helped Daniel repair the roof and reinforce the porch. The community that had tried to remove her now claimed her as one of their own. Not everyone changed. Reverend Walsh still preached caution. A few families kept their distance. But enough had shifted that Clara could walk through town without fear, could shop at the general store without whispers following her every step. One October evening, as they sat on the porch watching sunset, Clara said, "Do you remember what you asked me? At the station, when did you first found me? I asked if you were hurt. After that, you asked if I understood that you were taking me somewhere safe." She rested her head on his shoulder. "I didn't believe you then. Didn't believe anywhere could be safe for someone like me. But I was wrong. You built me a safe place, not just in this house, but in this life. In you." Daniel kissed the top of her head. "We built it together." "Together," she agreed. The baby came in December during the first snowfall, a girl with Clara's eyes and Daniel's dark hair. They named her Eliza, after Daniel's mother, but called her Liza from the start. Clara had an easy birth, assisted by Mrs. Shaw and 2 other women who'd learned to trust her. When Daniel finally held his daughter, he understood something fundamental about love, that it expanded infinitely, that there was always room for more. That night, with Clara sleeping and the baby in her cradle, Daniel sat by the fire and felt his mother's presence, not as a ghost Clara channeled, but as a memory that lived in the warmth of the house, in the traditions they kept, in the life they were building. The woman at the train station, broken and lost, speaking to people no one else could see, she had become Clara Mercer, wife and mother and healer. The man who'd carried her home, acting on instinct and kindness, he had become a husband and father who no longer measured his life in empty days, but in moments of fullness. Spring would come again. The dead would still need help, the town would still whisper sometimes, but inside the farmhouse on the hill, 3 people who'd been lost had found each other and built something that no one could take away. Clara had been right. Ashes did remember the shape of fire. And from those ashes, they had built a home that burned bright enough to light the darkness, warm enough to welcome the lost, strong enough to shelter those who needed it. The ghosts still came sometimes. Clara still helped them. But now she did it during daylight hours, with Liza sleeping in a basket nearby and Daniel working in the fields where he could see the house. She was no longer defined by what she saw, but by what she chose to do with that sight, and she chose love every single day. The town learned to live with Clara Mercer. More than that, they learned from her. Learned that strangeness wasn't the same as evil. That difference could be a gift. That the people we fear are often just the ones we haven't tried to understand. Years would pass. Liza would grow, and perhaps she'd inherit her mother's sight, or perhaps she'd be blessedly normal. Either way, she'd be loved. The farmhouse would fill with more children, more laughter, more life. And somewhere, in the space between living and dying, the grateful dead would keep watch over the woman who'd given them peace and the man who'd given her a home, because some debts can never be repaid. But they can be honored. Forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.